So, hello. Thank you for inviting me to StreamTech. I hope you all enjoyed lunch. I'm James from Harmonic, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about the growth we see in targeted advertising. Now, I'm sure that you've all noticed that people like Netflix, people like Disney, people like Amazon are all introducing an ad-funded tier. And that's really driven by a couple of things. One is to annoy you with the adverts so that you'll pay the higher fee, and the other is to try and make some money from advertising. But what we're seeing now is that advertising is becoming an expectation, and we're seeing pressure on national broadcasters and platforms to deliver targeted advertising. So we'll start by asking you some questions to see if you're actually still awake after lunch. So if you work for a company that uses targeted advertising today, could you put your hand up for me? Okay, a good few. That's about what I expect to see. Now, if I gave you the choice of watching adverts every 20 minutes or so, or paying 53 Swedish krona, or about $5 a month, not to see adverts, what would you choose? If you choose the advert, put your hand up. Oh, wow. One person. And, okay, so the rest of you won't choose the adverts. No need for hands there. That was a pretty clear split. Now, I suspect the reason that was slightly less asymmetric than I was expecting is because we're somewhat underrepresented by sort of Gen Z and lower income brackets in this room. There's some really interesting research that Deloitte have done over the last 4 or 5 years, and they ask the same question every year, which is the question I've just asked you, which is, given a choice of paying 53 Swedish krona or watching a few minutes of adverts from now, which would you pick? And in the US, typically, 60% of people will choose to watch the advert, 40% of people will pay not to watch the advert, and that's pretty consistent. Where that falls down a bit is when you get into looking at age demographics, and the same demographic who are very keen on the piracy that we saw earlier, the Gen Z and the younger generation, are also incredibly ad-averse. So let's have a look at how we can get some of those Gen Z engaged in advertising. So if we look particularly at Scandinavia at the moment, we can see here that you've got quite an unusual split of consumption compared to perhaps the UK or some other countries. So in the grey going down, this is a survey done by Deloitte, we've got Netflix, HBO and Disney. So you can see that for the main international streamers, they have got a challenge to try and gain older audiences. Now, older audiences, not actually that interesting to advertisers. Who knows why? Because they've got the money, but that is what it is. So they've got something to try and grow people. But if you look at the national broadcasters, SVT Play, NRK, TV Play, they're actually doing really well at attracting local users with local language content. So for them, they're trying to monetize better, but they're also trying to target better. So you can see people like Danish Radio at the moment have enforced a log-on their online platform to try and track people. So all is not necessarily well in the world of online advertising, despite the fact you see really high penetration rates here for platforms, 60 to 80%. For linear advertising at the moment, we are expecting revenues to drop across Scandinavia by 2% this year. And that's the number that we've seen drop for the last couple of years. So we know that linear advertising is not in a happy place at the moment. Equally, if you look at streaming growth across Scandinavia, the last few years, post-COVID, we've had some amazing growth. We've had 20% year-on-year growth across the commercial platforms in Scandinavia. This is running out. Scandinavia is becoming a very mature market, and we don't see that 20% growth continuing. We see that really running in single figures over the next few years. So where's the money coming from? The answer, I hope, is better targeted advertising. And we expect the advertising market globally and also in Scandinavia to grow by 5 or 6% over the course of this year. So I went and spoke to a lot of my customers around Europe, and I said, okay, really, advertising, you're not actually doing it, or you're not doing it very well, or you're not making very much money out of it. what is the problem you're having? And these are 3 use cases that 3 of my customers have given me on the condition I don't tell you who they are. The first one is marketing's told us to implement Google client-side advertising because we need something really fast. This is a really fast way to do advertising, but quite limiting, and we'll kind of come on to why that is in a minute. The other point they've raised is we can't deliver personalization at large scale on sport. Personalization is interesting. It's a bell curve. So if you're doing the Super Bowl at this end, you don't care about targeted advertising because everybody's going to watch the Coke or the Pepsi ad. No targeting needed. Down the other end of the scale, with the guys we saw this morning doing local sports, you also don't need to do targeted advertising because 3 people are watching it. Somewhere in the middle of not the very top tier sports, but slightly below, you will have quite a profitable space for targeted advertising. So we'll have a look at some of the problems around delivering personalization on sport. And I think the interesting thing for me is that a lot of people who are doing targeted advertising well think it's great, but they're not making enough money out of it. And they're selling all their spots, and they're selling all their spots at a really decent price point. So what can we do for those people? How can we generate more inventory? Because we know the more ads we put in, the more turned off our key Gen Z audience get. So it's a balance between ads and people switching off, literally switching off. So let's have a look at this first question we asked about, which is the Google client-side advertising. This is a diagram of a server-side ad insertion system. And there's a few things to note on here of what we consider to be a server-side ad insertion system. Everyone and his dog will come and do manifest manipulation for you. But we found it's quite interesting to be able to attach beaconing to the server-side advertising, to be able to attach ingest of adverts, and also ad transcoding. So remember this ad transcoding bit, because it becomes important later. So the reason we're going to do server-side rather than client-side is so we've got flexibility. One thing we found that works really well in Europe in terms of targeted advertising is thinking about how you sell your breaks. So if I've got a commercial break in the middle of a really interesting football match, I am going to go and sell the first and last in that break manually. I'm going to go and sell it to Coke or somebody. The middle of that break, probably people don't care about so much because everyone's already left to go and make the tea. So I'm probably going to sell those programmatically through something like Google. And server-side gives us a lot of flexibility to sell programmatically and also sell statically. If you're wondering about Google, Google is a really good way to sell adverts as a base. We've done some work with clients where we've implemented the Google PAL SDK, and we have found that we get a 10 to 20% uplift of revenue compared to selling through local agencies. So you can really go and do some interesting stuff with server-side, and you can do it with a lot of different people as a turnkey these days, so you're not building stuff. So at this point, somebody normally shouts and heckles from the back. Where are you, Yako? There at the front this time. But James, we're not American. This isn't going to work for us. There's too many problems, so let's have a think about some of these problems. The first one is, James, I don't have any SCUTty35 markers in my stream, so I don't know where my adverts are going to be. And surprisingly, this is still quite a common problem across Europe. The US had this sussed 20 years ago, right, with cable lab standards. But in Europe, often we find we don't have the right markers for either breaks or within a break to target and split ads at a sensible point. At this point, I have to come back to this morning's session on AI and introduce you to a little French company called Ignify. Now, Ignify have taken a lot of the AI technology that was talked about this morning in terms of language models and content, and they've done something interesting to it because they're not trying to identify anything in the video. They're just trying to identify where there's a break. So Ignify will sit markers in your streams, and then you can go with breakpoints at the beginning and end of breaks, but also in between ads, and that gives you the tools you need to do targeting. So there we are. Has that convinced you that you should do targeted advertising yet? Maybe not. The next objection I always get when having this conversation is, yeah, but James, server-side, it doesn't really scale. It's not going to go and do big. So I'd like to object to that a little bit, because in a typical month with server-side advertising, we can happily do 65,000 adverts, 260 million impressions, and 12 billion manifests. It's not unheard of for us to deliver 4 million manifests in a break on server-side advertising. Now, this is only possible because we run this in the cloud, right? Of course it's in the cloud. And you'd think that running server-side ad insertion in the cloud would be a really good use case, because I sit and do nothing for a long period of time. I spin all my servers down. I get a commercial break. I spin a load of stuff up. And I can go and process all my break, and then I spin it down again. But there's a problem with this. And normally it's that I get to the commercial break, and I go, hey, Azure, can I have another 20 servers to run my commercial break? And Azure goes, 15, 20 minutes, would that be okay? I'm a bit busy doing other stuff, other priorities. So we find that cloud doesn't necessarily answer our problems for this. Where we find this is interesting now is that we've got transcoding for adverts in here as well. So we can dynamically shift resource between transcoding for adverts and creative and live manifest manipulation. So I'm transcoding during the program, I'm flipping resource, and I'm manifest manipulating during the break. But actually, even that doesn't really scale enough for us. And what we've found works really well is when you all get together and work collectively, because you, SVT, or whoever in Scandinavia, won't have a commercial break at the same time as your neighbor. So what we've found is that by mutualizing people onto a single cloud platform, we can be inserting manifests for you at 2 minutes past 12 and you at 4 minutes past 12, and it kind of all works out in the wash. So we can scale this quite well. We did look at other technologies like serverless to do this, but we found that actually the cost of running serverless for DAI is somewhat comparable with the cost of running lots and lots of compute all the time. So we didn't do that. So we've sort of sat here and demonstrated, yeah, we can do advertising in the cloud, we can do it at scale. The next objection I normally get is, but James, that won't work for live sport, because live sport, I've got content that is, maybe 90 minutes long for a football match. My DVR window needs to be at least 90 minutes. That's a really, really big manifest. And if I've got a really big manifest and I've got to create 4 million unique versions of them, then actually I go and kill my CDN caching efficiency, and the manifests load is very, very significant. So how can we fix this? And actually, the answer to this comes from our hosts at Ivan and Magnus. And about 3 years ago, they had a really interesting little GitHub project called HLS Interstitial for DAI with long DVR. This is a technology from Apple to do more efficient manifests. And effectively what this means is that we can deliver one manifest for the program. That manifest will then reference sub-manifests. And the sub-manifest can be personalized, but the master manifest can be common to everybody. So we've now got a system here with sub-manifests, with sub-assets for the break, and a single common asset, a single common long 90-minute manifest. So this lets us do personalization at really large scale on sport by having an open DVR window. So that's my second thing solved, but I'm still sat here alienating all of my Gen Z user base because I'm showing them adverts, and they kind of hate adverts. If they could switch the advert off, they would. My kids will turn the volume down on Spotify when the advert comes on, which I suspect is not what the advertiser wanted. So how can we get around this? Now, I'm going to go all a bit American for a minute and talk about product placement, which I know we're not allowed to do here. So we've been doing some really cool stuff with a US company called Myriad, where we're looking at, again, using AI models to identify things within scenes. So we're using image recognition to identify placement opportunities within a scene. So in this case, we've got some AI that goes, that's a bridge. Bridges quite often have billboards on. Happy days. Or more usually, we're looking for things that already exist within a scene. So if we've got an advert, we can replace it with something else. Now, under European regulation, it's kind of a bit of a grey area. I definitely can't do that. That's definitely not allowed. But if I've got the content rights and I had a Coke billboard there already, I could probably replace it with a Pepsi billboard and not be replacing the, not be breaking the law. None of this is particularly proprietary. The way that this works is it takes a custom object model under Microsoft's AI environment, and it's doing detection of spaces. At the moment, this only works on video on demand because we have to take the segments and we have to render them to be able to deliver stuff. We do this quite a lot in the US at the moment. We have managed to do 82 billion ad impressions with this methodology without increasing content load. So proven at scale, 80% of viewers report they like this format, and it's 7 times more preferred by viewers, particularly among Gen Z, than the standard ad format. So this is great. We should all do this, right? No, because we're not allowed to do that over here. It's a bit sad. I'd love to have some nice dynamic placement, but it's not to be. So we have a bit of a compromise going on in what we're referring to as in-stream advertising. So what we are allowed to do in Europe about advertising is be really, really obvious. So you can see some examples here we've got of different ways of taking content, squeezing it back, and inserting a targeted ad. So how do we do this? This is the idea that we're going to create a double box or a squeeze back. We're going to keep people engaged, and we're going to try and use all the same technology that we've used to date to do standard ads. So there's nothing clever here. This is exactly the same targeted ad ecosystem that we already have. And we can demonstrate all sorts of different shapes here. These are all quite boring and engineering-y, but because it's just about squeezing back a square or collapsing things down. But I'm sure somebody creative could come along and do something with curved edges, because all this is a standard piece of advertising content as a video where we've defined a key. So we're able to squeeze it back, do all sorts of different things there. And you can see on the far side, there's a few examples going through of how we push that back. And this is quite well liked. It's not objected to, and it's well consumed. And it works in exactly the same way as a standard ad insertion. For the in-stream inventory tagging, we'll consume something like Opta sports data, and we'll feed that in, and we'll treat the Opta sports data like it was a SCTI 35 marker. We will then go and do a standard manifest opt using the HLS interstitial that we talked about. But rather than swap to a VOD asset effectively for the advert, we're going to do something slightly clever at this point. And we're going to go and take all of that cloud resource that we had for doing ad transcoding, and we're going to use it to live transcode the short in-stream ad. So I'm going from having one live stream to having maybe 10, 20, 30 live streams, depending on the number of inventories I've got. And I'm effectively switching you away to another live stream for 10 seconds, and then switching you back to the main program. And so people like this, and it's relatively simple to do. You can personalize it, and again, we can target this. So in my head, we've not done this yet, but we've got quite a good set of targeting data that says, do I support Sweden, Stockholm, or do I support Malmo? Stockholm, Malmo, which one's it going to be? So we could actually change that. We're going to put the graphic in on a goal or a miss, and if you're a Stockholm fan, we'll put the text up and go, hey, congratulations, you scored, and here's an advert. And if you're a Malmo fan, we'll put up the text that says, oh, sorry, guys, but here's an advert anyway. So again, the critical thing here is, right, we're not reinventing a whole new ecosystem. You can do this with your standard ad sales tools. You can do it with your standard clients. It's just back-end work to say, okay, rather than switch away to an asset, I'm actually going to dynamically create a squeeze back. And this is really proving popular among young people and advertisers as well, because rights owners are looking for ways to make more inventory available in sport. You can only get away with putting a few things in, and if you remember, putting adverts in the wrong place is really unpopular. With the England match in the Euro footballs, we managed to put an advert right over the winning goal. Still gets talked about 10 years later. We can sell new inventory, so we've got more things to sell. And it's a new way to engage. It's less annoying than perhaps the classic 30-second ad spot. So I hope that's given you some food for thought. And if you're going to go away and build something interesting, come and tell me about it, because I'm always keen to know what people do. Do you think in-stream advertising could work for you? I think this could be an interesting thing to grow with. And let me know what you build.